Dr. Yami, thank you so much for joining us on the Plan Trainers podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. This is such an honor.
Yeah, we've been on Instagram talking back and forth for a long time, so this has been a long time coming. So I'm really glad that we are doing this. And before we start talking about all of our amazing topics of the day, can you please let us know if you have a moment of gratitude to share?
Yes, well, I'm just grateful to be on this show and to be able to reach more people, more moms and dads, and others that are helping to feed children out there to help them have a more peaceful life.
I think that's what every parent wants is a more peaceful life. And I think that their children's health and their children's nutrition is often a big piece in that difference if they don't feel like they're having a peaceful life.
Exactly.
Yeah, so today's conversation is going to be strong. It's going to help a lot of people out there. And why don't you let us know first, how did you find a plant-based lifestyle?
Well, I have been vegan and eating a plant-based diet for 8.5 years now. And it was just serendipity. I was really into long distance running, and I read a book called Born to Run. You might have heard of it if you guys like to run. And in it, they talk about the Tarahumara Indians in Mexico. And also in there is Scott Jurek. And they're talking about eating a plant-based diet and how this indigenous tribe liked to run all the time. And they were really calm. And my brain just kind of put it together like, wait a second, they run all the time, they're healthy, and they're calm. That sounds like a good deal. Maybe it's not this unhealthy diet that causes you to have all kinds of deficiencies and makes you weak and the kind of stereotypes and images we might have about being vegan or eating a plant-based diet. So for some reason, I just got it in my head. I'm just going to try this for 30 days. I don't know why. I'm just going to try it and see what it feels like to eat this way. I didn't tell anybody in my family I was going to do it. And I'm Panamanian, so it didn't seem like it was going to be super difficult to me because I love rice and beans. That's easy. And they talked about the Tarahumara eating a lot of beans and corn. And then I just had peanut butter toast for breakfast. And I did that for a while. And within the first 3 days, my chronic constipation, which I had had for over 3 decades of my life, and I thought was, quote, genetic, and just what my whole family had, was cured. And I was taking medications for this. So that was huge. And then, of course, the stereotypical cliche, I felt more energy. I literally did feel calmer. And really from then, it was just reading more books, Diet for a New America, and of course, watching the documentaries. And by the end of the 30 days, there was no going back.
It's amazing how, as a doctor, you weren't trained in plant-based nutrition. You didn't learn that in medical school. But reading these books, we come across this information and then we try it on ourselves. I did the same thing, but reading Thrive and Thrive Fitness with Brendan Brazier's books. And that's what impacted me. But it's the power of the food that we consume that really takes us to the next level. And as a pediatrician, how did you now take what you experimented on yourself into your practice as a doctor?
Well, the first 30 days was just me. I didn't try to change the diet of my family or anybody else around me. But once I decided that this was going to be the way I was going to eat, I was curious. I still didn't feel that sure, but I was curious about whether this could be safe in children. Because physicians, especially pediatricians, are taught that children must have dairy and need to have meat for protein, and they need all of this to grow. You have to have a, quote, balanced diet, and balance means like everything, right, including the animal products. And we're taught that if you don't, you're going to get deficiencies, and these deficiencies can lead to health problems. And that's really what's in your brain, because what's in your brain is what you're exposed to. You're not exposed to all the rest. And that's all you're taught in medical school is pathology, because being a doctor is learning pathology. You're not really learning, you're not spending a big amount of time on prevention. You're spending the most of the time is like, okay, this is the problem. Here's how you fix it. This is the origins of this problem. This is all of the details of this problem and how you fix it. You don't learn how to prevent problems. So I didn't learn about prevention when it came to diet and lifestyle. So in my brain, I was like, oh my gosh, I could potentially harm my children. Their brains are going to grow. Their bones are going to disintegrate. It's going to be horrible. So I was like, before I change my family, I'm going to take another month and I'm just going to read and find all the literature I can. And I, as a physician, I'm lucky because I have access to journals and those kinds of things. By the end of that month, I was flabbergasted, because what I found through my research was not only, yeah, could they survive? No, not only could we make it on that kind of diet, but they could actually thrive. And actually, this is probably the way I should be feeding them, except I never knew this before. So it was like my world just did a complete 180. It's kind of hard to describe when you've been in a paradigm for so long, and suddenly that paradigm is completely shifted, and you're kind of just like teetering there, like, what just happened? And you see the world completely different. And because of that, that's why I became so passionate about it. So at the end of that second month, so when I sat my family down, told them what I had learned, and this has happened even with the intuitive eating thing, because once I find new information, I sit my family down and be like, okay, this is what I know now. This is what I think we should do. And my kids were small at that time. My oldest one was 6 and my youngest one was 18 months. And thankfully, I have a very sweet husband who doesn't do any cooking or shopping. So he was basically like, yeah, fine, whatever. Actually, at the beginning, he said, well, I may just buy some of my own cheese and things like that. And I reserved him like a special drawer in the refrigerator, but he detests grocery shopping. It's not his thing. So that literally lasted 2 weeks. After that, it was gone. So really, it was only 2 weeks of having animal products. And since then, it hasn't been present in our home. So that's how I transitioned my family. It was pretty simple because my kids were little.
So a couple of things there. Number one, you're making me remember a time where I sat down, Adam was going to bed. He's like, shush, come to bed. I'm like, I can't. I haven't figured out if the kids had enough calcium and protein today. And I was analyzing everything that they were eating and writing it all down and looking up all the nutrient values to make sure that I wasn't hindering my children, that I wasn't going to stop the brain development. And I was still researching, like, is this okay? It was okay to screw us up, but it wasn't okay to screw them up, kind of thing. That was a stage that I was still in, although he was completely convinced. So, you're kind of making me go back to that. But what I love about what you're saying, which is so different, so many people and doctors in particular who we interview had a run in with a book first and really, like one of the more profound books, like China Study, that goes into more detail, or Watch Forks Over Knives, that goes into more detail, and it almost seems like they found a person and started following a person, where you did so much of the research on your own. And you came to this realization on your own. So I think that that's great. It takes away this kind of idea that veganism or plant-basedism can be cultish kind of thing. But this is something that you came to on your own. So I love that happened. And you brought up intuitive eating. So why don't you talk to us and tell us what your definition of intuitive eating is?
Okay. Well, let me take you a couple of steps back first, because I've always been a passionate pediatrician when it comes to helping children live healthy lives. I have a Master of Public Health, and so I see things also from a public health lens and a population lens. And I've always been so frustrated by this whole childhood obesity problem. And I'm putting that in air quotes, okay, because I have a different perspective on this now, much different than even most of the plant-based people, okay? So this could get controversial. But I was very passionate about this, and I'm like, how do we solve this? And all of these different things coming to my mind is just so frustrating, and this problem, and thinking about calories and thinking about, just it's very complicated, and it is complicated. But when I discovered plant-based nutrition, it all just became so simple. It's focusing on whole foods. We're not trying to figure out calories. We're not trying to figure out nutrients. And, you brought up the China study, and I just also think about this as a holistic sort of approach instead of a reductionist approach. Whenever we look at plant-based nutrition, whenever we look at whole foods, whenever we look at calorie density, we can simplify this issue without having to get all complicated. And, I don't know if I'm coming across the way I want to, but it really just made sense to me. And this was not something that anybody talked about. Even before that, nobody was really emphasizing whole foods. We were just talking about, okay, decrease the fat in things, decrease the calories in things. Let's do skim milk instead of whole milk. Let's do lean chicken instead of fried chicken. We weren't really talking about just like whole foods, fruits and vegetables, So first of all, it really simplified that for me. And I just knew that this was the way. And that's why I latched onto it and I became so passionate about it. But then the next step was the intuitive eating. So definitely I feel like we should be emphasizing whole plant foods. Even if people don't want to go all the way vegan or all the way whole food plant-based, we need to really start with a foundation of whole plant foods and emphasizing that everywhere, in the home, in the schools, in the hospitals, everywhere. But then the second step is intuitive eating. And I think this is especially important for parents because we do freak out a lot, like every day, about how much our kids do and don't eat. So to me, intuitive eating is just a very basic concept of honoring your hunger and satiety. That's it. It doesn't mean that you're automatically going to know that an apple is healthier than Applejack cereal. That's not what intuitive eating means. It means that you eat when you're hungry, you stop when you're satisfied. And that's important for parents because the majority of parents, 80% of parents, try to get their kids to eat more. They don't trust their children's hunger and satiety signals. And the reason that that's a problem is because whenever we interfere, we are starting to mess with that inner wisdom that the children have, and we train them out of it. Basically, we teach them how to not listen to their bodies and not pay attention to their hunger and satiety signals. And then that kind of cascades on later to problems, either whether it's under eating or overeating or seeing foods as good or bad, because that's very common at the dinner table. You can't have, your chocolate cake until you eat your broccoli, things like that. And so we start really interfering with how children view food and how they view their bodies because of that simple thing. So that's why I then learned that I needed to start teaching parents how to trust that. And it takes a lot of practice because, like I said, we're anxious and we get freaked out. And believe me, I am one of those parents. Anxiety number one when it comes to my kids sometimes. So I have to remind myself, all right, take a deep breath. Everything's going to be fine. Shut your mouth and don't interfere. So that's why I talked about the division of responsibilities. For parents, our job is to decide what, when, and where the child is to eat. They are to decide if and how much. That's everybody's jobs. We don't cross into their role. They don't cross it over to our role. Now, when they get a little bit older, teenagers and older kids might be kind of helping with meal planning and menu planning and those kinds of things. But until then, really, that is the division of responsibilities that was created by Ellen Satter. And that's something that I also teach.
And so if we're sitting down to dinner and the kid says, I don't want to eat to dinner today, do we just allow them not to eat dinner today? Or if they say, I want to have my dessert first, do we just let them have the dessert first and assume they're going to eat their meal after?
So you have to kind of do things differently. You have to approach it from the beginning differently. When it comes to dessert, if you're going to offer dessert, which every family's different. Some families really like dessert and that's their thing. Some families hardly ever have dessert. I recommend you probably don't have it every single day, or if you do, it's not like this elaborate sort of thing. But the recommendation, especially from Ellen Satter and the research and all of the experience she has, is if you're going to offer dessert, you offer it at the same time as everything else. And then the child can decide if they want to have it. They may want to have it first, and you just got to take a deep breath and look away because it freaks us out. We think that they're only going to eat dessert. But what happens, it's so counterintuitive. What happens is when we interfere and we pry and we say, you can't eat dessert because you got to eat your broccoli first because that's a good food, that's a better food. It messes with kids, just like when you're telling you can't have that thing, you can't do that thing, that's what they're going to want more. So whenever you neutralize and make everything the same, Children actually do make good choices for their body. And sometimes that dessert's not appealing to them and they just want to eat a plate full of broccoli. It's the weirdest, craziest thing because we think we have to direct them, but really they'll figure it out as long as we just like don't interfere. And the first question is, if they're not hungry, if they're not hungry, don't force them to eat. But Ellen Satter does teach, you want to teach your children manners, and you have a time that you sit at the table. Everybody sits there. If you're not hungry, you don't have to eat. Then afterwards, you clean up, you put their food away. So this is what I recommend in my book. You put their food in a container or something, put it in the fridge or on the counter in the microwave. They might be hungry an hour or two. That's their dinner. It's not going to be like, I'm going to wait an hour or two so I can have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. It's not what happens at my house. But yeah, it's really trusting your kids. The other thing about children is that when they are small, they really do tune into their bodies. And every human has a different circadian rhythm when it comes to their appetite. My youngest one wakes up with a ravenous appetite. He eats like this huge breakfast, a medium lunch, and a pretty small dinner, unless he's been doing sports and just like really hitting it hard. Sometimes then he eats a huge dinner too. My oldest one actually doesn't eat breakfast at all. He skips breakfast. And that's something that I had to learn to be comfortable with. He doesn't eat till about 9, 10-ish and he gets to eat a snack at school, and then he eats his lunch, and he eats like gigantic dinner. Okay. So he's shifted, and I've learned to honor that and respect that. We just get worried because we feel like they need to be eating the same every time, or they need to be eating as much as us, or we gauge how much they should be eating. But what's most important is that overall they're growing, and they're growing along their curve, and they're developing, and they will follow what their body is telling them to do. They're going to acquire the calories that they need to for appropriate growth and development.
So I've taught a lot of this through our plant-based picky eater program, and I found that the parents who are willing to let go and kind of not show emotion and smile when their kids make the choices, their kids do start to make choices, but it doesn't necessarily happen on the first try. So some parents are going to leave here and they're going to go ahead and they're going to do it, and they're going to see, it didn't work. They ate a whole cake and they didn't eat their broccoli. I'm never doing that again. When they're at a certain age, they will take time to kind of get in there, especially when you've been restricting for a while, because all of a sudden it's a free-for-all and they want to have fun with it and they can't control it. But after a while, it kind of folds in. Is that what you find as well?
Exactly. And yeah, there's nothing wrong with them eating a whole cake. If you're going to offer cake, you have to be okay with them eating a whole cake. You know what I'm saying? It's fine. I also think, and I know because I'm not accusing other parents because I've been this parent. I am this parent. Okay. I think we just focus so much on the details. We get so concerned about the details that this really worries us. So because if your kid doesn't eat broccoli today, tomorrow, or next week, it doesn't make them an unhealthy or bad person. They're not going to like be a criminal or a drug addict because of this. I'm just saying this because my brain has done this in the past. Okay. And it doesn't make you a bad parent. And what I recommend to people, to parents, offer the health promoting foods, step back, and let what happen. But if you're offering chocolate cake every single night, then that's a thing too. And that's what I talk about in the 5 pillars of healthy eating, establishing a positive environment. At home, try to keep your foods as health promoting as possible. So if you're going to have Doritos and you're going to have goldfish and fruit snacks and stuff like that, and your kids are eating them, I mean, what can I say? They're there. You know what I'm saying? Like, we eat what we see in our environment. So make your environment a positive environment that is going to support how you want your family to eat. Offer the foods and then step back, and then your child's going to make that decision.
So let's break it down a little bit, because I love what you're saying, into more situations that people are going through, because they're probably going through, well, what should I do in this case? So for example, we don't have dessert very often. Last night, we happened to have dessert before we even ate dinner. We went to one of our favorite vegan Italian restaurants, and it's all made fresh, so it takes a long time to come out. We had just been shopping all day, so we were kind of exhausted and hungry. So Yeah, we had our cannolis and our tiramisu before dinner, but the kids wanted more. But I wasn't gonna buy 18 tiramisus or 4 tiramisus for each of us. Like they're pretty big, and the everything's pretty big. So we divided everything into 4, and you get what you get. So if you're restricting in that way, is that okay? As opposed to saying, well, if you want another tiramisu, I'm just gonna spend another $7.99 and buy one.
Yeah, loving limits. So, the situation, and it sounds like your kids are old enough to understand, like, hey, we're not going to get our dinner yet. We're all ravenous. We're out having a fun night. Why not? Let's have our tiramisu first. No problem. Yeah. Okay, we had our tiramisu, guys. Now we got to wait till our spaghetti or whatever's out, and that's okay. Loving limits. There's different parenting styles when it comes to feeding children. And one of the parenting styles is called indulgent. And those are the parents that never say no to anything. That also does not help intuitive eating because children do need limits. And that's why you have the division of responsibilities. If you have a house where food is out everywhere and the kid can just eat all day long, that also does not support intuitive eating, actually. So you do want to have structure. You do want to have a parental guidance, but you want to do it in a way that doesn't interfere with their ability to tune into their hunger and satiety, and also keeps foods neutral. However, like I said, we do know that there are some foods that provide health benefits and some that may not provide very many benefits or may actually harm us. There are different ways that we can talk to our kids about that when they're older. When they're younger, you just make the decisions and that's the food that you offer them. They're not deciding what food they're going to eat. You decide. And then as they get older, they may have some input into that. And then you can explain more about that, especially when you're going out to eat or you're going to parties and those kinds of situations.
One thing after teaching kindergarten for 10 years plus that I learned very quickly, and that I would always teach the parents of the students that I had, is if you don't want the answer to be no, don't ask a question. So if you only have one fruit left in the house and your child says you're hungry and you say, well, do you want an apple? If they say no, it's no. At that point, you can't force them down to have an apple without having any kind of behavioral or psychological consequence happening there. So if it's apple, you say, here's some apple. I'm cutting you apple. Make it a statement as opposed to asking a question. But if you say, do you want apple? Do you want cucumber? Do you want carrots? Do you want olives? And the answer is no to all of that. Well, then the only things left are the chips and the chocolate and the cake. Then you've gotten yourself into that situation. Now, again, I've been there completely, even knowing what I've taught other parents, I found myself in that. So it's something that you need to practice. It's our intuition, because we want to make our kids happy. We want to give them what they want. We know what it's like to not have what we want, and we want to give to our children. So that's definitely something that I would always teach my my clients and those parents. Is that something that you agree with?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's very wise. And for the younger kids, you don't ask, you just serve. Mm-hmm. And you have structure. So you have your breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks as needed. Some kids, when they're older, they don't eat snacks. Some kids, when they're younger, might have snacks. So it depends on how frequently your child is eating. And so you cut up the apples and give it along with their glass of water or whatever you have there, But I will say, too, what you were saying as far as not being perfect, I think that's really important to know, is that we're not perfect and we're not going to do this perfectly. And we're going to learn as we go, and we're going to be able to find strategies that work for us and work for our families. It is trial and error. But the most important thing to understand is your kids are going to be fine. Really, the majority of the time, kids are just going to be fine. So with that in mind, it gives you the moment to step back, take a deep breath, and be like, okay, I can do this. Like, you don't have to be perfect about it. And you learn as you go. I think that's the most important thing.
And I think our kids learn from their experiences. And it reminds me of a story of our son, Russ, who was at a party and he wanted chips. It was the only snack that was vegan that he could have. He asked how much he could have, because he's very good at asking how much of whatever he's allowed.
I don't know where he got that from, but yeah.
We have whatever you want. He ended up eating the full family bag size of regular chips. and he felt terrible after. And remembering how he felt allowed him the next time to know that, no, I'm not eating a full bag of chips anymore because I know how I felt when I was done. So our kids will often learn from those experiences, and they learn more about their body and what they're capable and able to eat in a healthier, good feeling way.
Exactly. And the only reason he was able to learn that is because you trusted him. I think that's what's another key point for parents, is that whenever we feel like we always have to be the kids' boundaries as far as food quantities, is that it makes that food more attractive to them. And then if they do overeat and feel bad, they don't anchor it because it didn't become their choice anymore. It's almost like they overate because they had this sense of scarcity, of desperation, that they're not ever going to get enough of that food. So because you said, I trust you, eat what you want. And then he was like, well, I'm just going to eat the whole thing. And then he was like, oh man, that wasn't a good choice, because it was his choice. Whenever we tell them, no, you can only have a handful, that's it, no more. And then they go and they sneak and they eat a bunch. Not only do they may feel some shame and guilt about it, but they're not going to anchor that as their choice. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Absolutely. And different kids are different personalities too. Like if you look at our son, he's extremely literal. So he was told, this bag of chips is for you, because everything else was cheesies and Doritos and whatever. And the mom was like, I don't want people putting their hands in one thing and their hands in another. So this bag it's only for Russell to eat out of. But his understanding was, well, if it could be all for me and I can have it all, where, so he took that literally, and he will say, like, is this enough for me? Or, like, should I have more? Should I have different things? He's very understanding of nutrition and wants to get a good plant-based balanced diet, where my daughter will be like, okay, it's a free for all. Let's go. They've got different personalities. And like, if you say, like, this bag of chips is only for you to eat from, but eat as much as you want, she'll keep going, even if she's over her limit. They're different personalities and they're learning with their own experiences. So let me ask you this. I'm sure a lot of parents are saying, well, at first I wasn't buying all these junk foods at home, but then kids become school age kids and, they want something in their lunchbox too. I remember teachers, the grade 1 teacher still reminds me, he's like, I used to look at Russell's lunchbox and I used to be like in shock. It was so different. It was the complete opposite of everybody else's. Like, he had no snack. He would come home from school and he would choose something a little bit more on the junkier side, let's say. But in his lunchbox, it was all, I just gave him good stuff. But then as they got a little bit older, they get a made good bar here, or, or whatever they're getting. They get like one thing a day, but I'll buy a box, or I'll buy enough for each of them to have one a day for the week. But what if they come home from school, people are saying, and they just want more, and I'm going to let them trust what they do, and they're just going to eat all of that. Do I go out on Tuesday again and replenish, or do I say it's just for the week? Where is the language in terms of teaching them limits? And again, those loving limits. I don't want to spend $800 on foods that I really don't want my kids eating. So how do you limit kids without and trust them without creating behavioral issues going forward?
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's a great question. I want to go back to the other thing that you said first, though, as far as kids having different personalities, because our personalities are rooted in genetics. And what's fascinating is that our eating styles, how much we want to eat, the speed that we eat at, how attractive food looks to us is completely genetic. So you're going to have different kids in the family that eat completely differently. Some that seem like they're obsessed with food, and some that are like, I'm just going to eat a couple bites of this. I'm full. Bye. I got to go play, and that's normal and that's okay. So don't think that you're doing something wrong because one of your kids seems like, the foodie that just like, sits there and just like takes a bite, like, oh my God, this is so good, because I have one of those. I have a foodie and I have one that just like literally eats to live, like he's just like, I'm just going to have a couple bites and I'm going to go play. And so that's very normal. And just also to know and think about that for yourself too, because us as adults, we have those genetic differences as well. And sometimes we may have blamed ourselves for liking food too much or felt ashamed of that. And that's rooted in genetics, and it's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. As far as what I call play foods or these processed foods, you have to be careful with language, because even saying things like junk foods starts to polarize it and makes it seem like that's a bad thing and it's off limit. It's going to hurt your body, and so you shouldn't eat it. And so it makes it more attractive and alluring. So, it's a very common word. We all say it. I still slip out and say it too, but we do want to be careful with that. And then, for the other foods, you call it more whole foods, less processed foods, those kinds of things. So you have to find what language that you want to use in your family that's going to be beneficial for you guys. I like that approach, and that's what I do in my family too. So once your kids are in school and they're exposed to all of these foods out in the real world, then if they want them, we should probably be offering them. Because if we tell them you shouldn't have that, that's a bad food, they're going to want it more. So you just kind of have to find what foods you're willing to offer them. And there's a couple of ways you can approach that. One of them is put it in their lunchbox regularly, use it as snack. So snacks at home, put it in their lunchbox. Or the other thing you can do is put it in their play food drawer. So this is especially helpful for whenever you've done things differently and now you're approaching it in the new intuitive eating way, because your kid is like, if I have this food, I'm going to eat it till I literally burst and die. That's the kind of food you want to put in the play food drawer, because you're going to tell them that, hey, this food is here if you want it. You can decide if you want it. And over time, like at the beginning, they may eat it all at once. And then over time, it may be there for like days and weeks and months, So I agree with, if you're going to get stuff for the lunchbox and you say, hey guys, I'm getting these granola bars. These are these special yummy granola bars we're going to put in the lunchbox. This is for your lunches. If they run out by the end of the week, I'm not getting more till next week. That's okay. That's loving limits. I mean, you don't need to be, and we don't want to be the indulgent parent who the kid's like, I want more ice cream. All right, let me go to the store and get it for you. That's not what we're teaching here. We're teaching that we're a parent, that we're in charge. We're feeding our kids healthy foods, but we're also exposing them to some of these other foods that they feel that they may want, so that we can neutralize foods for them. And like you said, every kid is different. Some kids want more of these processed foods and some kids don't. So you just kind of have to see what your kid is needing and wanting in order to help them establish that positive relationship with food.
And what if that drawer is overstuffed a little bit and a parent wants to say, you could choose something from the play drawer, and if you're still hungry, you could choose something from the refrigerator or the counter?
Yeah, so the way I do the play food drawer is they have control over their play food drawer. And I don't it's funny because, like I said, my kids have different personalities. So one of my kids' play food drawers has stuff like that's a year old and like stale and gross, But because we've done this for several years now, it's not a problem anymore. It's at the beginning, parents freak out because they put stuff in the play food drawer and it's gone the next day. But you don't have to refill it every day. You can choose, tell your kids, I'm going to get something for your play food drawer every week or once a month or whatever. And then when it runs out, it runs out. But the only rules I have for my kids for their play food drawer is please refrain from eating something from your play food drawer right before a meal, because it is going to take away your appetite and then you're not going to be hungry for the food. So they usually have it. The most often time that they go grab something from their play food drawer is after dinner, before they brush their teeth. So those are the two rules. Not right before a meal, and not after you've brushed your teeth.
I love these tips. Such good advice. So we've talked about like sitting down, well, not directly, but sitting down as a family to eat. Mm-hmm. And we've talked about this before, but I want to get your perspective on the importance of, especially in this fast-paced world right now, and as the kids get older, they're on different schedules, parents are working or not. I want to get your perspective on the importance of sitting down for a meal as a family, and how parents can kind of get that to happen on a more regular basis if they're struggling with that, because I think there's extreme value there. And I'd love for you to share.
You're right. No, this is so important. There's so much research on this about family meals. It doesn't help just for the food stuff and the nutrition stuff and for the healthy body stuff, but it really helps for mental health, especially as your kids are getting older, going into adolescence. It's really important. Now, you don't have to do it every single day. You don't have to do it every single meal. Even if you can do it 2 days a week, 2 times a week, there's evidence there that it's beneficial. What I see so much of, especially the parents that have kids that have chronic abdominal pain, have chronic constipation, suffering from a lot of ailments, those are the families that are too busy. And I know, because we're really busy now that my kids are both in sports, sometimes everybody's at different places at the same time, and it's really complicated. But sometimes we need to take a step back and ask ourselves, is it necessary to do all of these activities, and what is the expense of it? Do we really have to have little Jimmy in karate and basketball and piano lessons and all this at the same time? And because of this, we're having to go through McDonald's drive-thru every night. Take a step back. I think kids need to be kids, and we need to have enough time for family time and to help raise them and to help spend time together. They're going to have the entire rest of their lives to learn skills and to try new things. So maybe tone it down a little bit. Find a way to adjust your schedule so that at least twice a week you can come together as a family, sit down, no devices, no TV, none of that stuff at the table, and share a meal together.
I think for mental health, that's huge. A lot of the decisions that I make as a parent, and it's funny because my kindergarten parents used to say to me, like, can I pull my kid out of school for a week to go to Florida? And I used to say, look, I think they're still going to get into the same university, so we're good. You should have your family time. So a lot of the parenting decisions that I make is, will they still get into the same university if I let them do this or if I tell them not to do this? But I think now that they're getting a little bit older, I'm making decisions based on, will this help them stay in university kind of thing? Will this give them the confidence? Will this build the relationship between us and them? Will this give them the social skills to be able to go out on their own and be a responsible adult? That's kind of where I'm at with them now that they're, getting towards the later years of school age children. And I think that we need to kind of sometimes take a breath and make sure that we are spending time together, because our relationship with our children cannot just be do this, do that, get in the car, do that. We need to be able to talk to our children, understand our children, and give them an opportunity to speak to us. And I think while we eat, that's such an important, great time to do it, because not only are we all relaxed with nothing else going on, the phone rings, you let the phone ring, but also we're able to set an example for our children in what we're eating. They don't see what we're eating when they're at school. They don't see what we're eating after they go to bed, and sometimes, thank God. But, we want to set an example that we're eating our veggies too, right? And
exactly. No, I was going to, if you didn't say that, that's what I was going to say is role modeling is one of the most important things that we can do for our children. That's why sometimes when I have parents say, well, how can I teach my kids to like vegetables if I don't like vegetables? It's hard. And it's never too late. Even if you think that you're the pickiest person in the world, you can start to acquire those flavors for food and integrate them into your diet. So it's really important. Nobody's going to like everything. I'm not saying you have to eat every single thing. I'm not saying you have to be perfect, but role modeling that, and role modeling as well, which is very important to me, a positive body image, non-dieting, and really just taking care of your body in a loving, compassionate way instead of this restrictive, scornful, hateful way that we tend to in our society because of the thin ideal.
So when we are saying that we don't like bread, or bread is not good for us, we gain weight when we eat bread, and we categorize bread as a bad food, yet we're making our children sandwiches on a daily basis and giving it to them. There's such a disconnect between that. And I think that semantics plays a huge part there. If you know that bread is a trigger for you and you're not just going to just eat bread and it's going to make you eat all these other foods. For some people, they can't eat bread yet because of where they are psychologically with the way that they eat, but changing the vocabulary from I don't eat bread to I prefer to say no to bread today so that I have a lot more room for all these other things that I'm trying to get in. Is that just semantics, or do you actually think that that will work in a
No,
positive way?
I think that's so important. And it also depends on the age of your child. So my children are old enough that they know I have issues with food. And some of these issues I've been able to eliminate and it's no longer a problem, but there's still some that hang on. I will say that I don't know why bread. I think in our society, like we literally have demonized bread. So bread has been one of the last ones for me. So it's true. I tell my kids sometimes, I still struggle with this. You know, I have a hard time around bread. I still have that feeling like I can't get enough of it. And so I just tell my kids, they're old enough. They know my food issues. They know that it's not that bread is bad. It's just that I need to figure out my way around it. When your kids are younger, maybe don't even say anything. Like you don't have to even say anything about it to them. You can just find a way that it works for you and your food and body issues and works for them. So you just kind of have to find a way. But you do have to be very careful because we're so used to saying things in a certain way in our society because it's so normalized. Like fat talk and talking poorly about our bodies is so normalized that we don't think it's a bad thing. But I'm going to tell you that kids, even the littlest kids, 4 and 5 years old, they hear that. They latch onto that so quickly. They think it's normal to say that, oh, I have a big butt or I have a fat butt or my thighs are so fat or big. Oh, I hate my stomach. Fast. They start thinking that they need to be over-focused on the size of their bodies and lumps and bumps and things everywhere. And it's harmful. And I know that we're not doing it on purpose. We never want to hurt our children. We want the best for our children. But whenever we're talking like this about ourselves, those little ones, they hear it. So trying the best you can to be loving to yourself. And I know it's hard at the beginning, especially when people have had decades and decades and decades of hating their bodies and doing whatever they can to change their bodies. It's difficult, but you can do it. Just practice. It takes time. And at the most, even if you can't say loving things to yourself, don't say the bad things out loud. So that's where you can at least start.
It's a good place to start.
Yeah, it's such an important thing to remember. Leading by example is something we talk about often, and our kids hear everything that we say, both positive and negative. So we have to be extra careful to make sure that they are not acting on the negatives if we're saying them out loud, and stay as positive as possible. So that's some great advice, great tips, great conversation today. There's so much more that we could definitely talk about, but being mindful of time, where, Dr. Yami, would you like people to go to reach out to you to get more amazing information that you're putting out there?
Thank you so much. So I'm active on social media, on Instagram, where you guys found me. I'm at the Dr. Yami, so TheDoctorYami, and that's also my handle on Facebook. And my website is dryami.com, so spelled out DoctorYami.com. And you can find out about my book there too. It's helping a lot of people. So if you feel like you struggle from these problems, body image, your relationship with food in your body, and how you can raise a child in that atmosphere, pick up a copy of my book. It's called A Parent's Guide to Intuitive Eating, How to Raise Kids Who Love to Eat Healthy. And I go all over all of this in detail and even more. So I really appreciate you guys having me on today so that I can share my message.
Thank you so much. We appreciate your time. We appreciate your wisdom. And we will link to everything that you just said, including your book and Born to Run and Diet for a New America, and in our show notes at planttrainers.com. Very important books, all three of them. Yeah.
Thanks so much for being here on the Plant Trainers podcast today. We appreciate it.
Thank you guys for having me. I hope you have a plantastic day.
Oh.